Dad's $20,000 didn't vanish into a scam or a hacker's scheme. It disappeared right under our own roof. Not through strangers, but through someone we trusted. Someone who walked past my desk, read the numbers written in my father's handwriting, and saw opportunity instead of loyalty. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes dressed as family. And what unraveled in our house wasn't just a pile of receipts, it was years of excuses, favoritism, and silence finally snapping. I was the one who worked the port shifts, who saved every dollar, who planned for a future built on discipline. My sister was the one who spent it all in a weekend. This is the story of what happens when the golden child burns through more than money, they burn through trust. If you've ever had to draw that hard line, hit subscribe and stay with me. Growing up in our house felt like living in two parallel realities. Sabine floated through hers like a golden child crowned from the start, every mistake polished into a story. Every indulgence dressed up as charm. If she wanted a designer dress for prom, Dad joked about investing in her confidence, while Mom cashed in a bond without blinking. If I asked for help buying a textbook, the air thickened with lectures about responsibility, about how hard work builds character. That was the unspoken family law. Sabine was an investment. I was an expense. And that law followed us into adulthood like a shadow. Sabine still walked into rooms with a glow that blinded my parents to her debts. Her excuses, her lies. She was their spark, their proof that charisma mattered more than caution. I, meanwhile, became the invisible backbone, the steady hand at the port, clocking in before dawn, scanning cargo seals under cranes that rose like iron trees. Every day I worked shifts that left my back aching and my hands blistered. But in our home, discipline didn't sparkle the way charm did. That's how the reliability tax works. Once people realize you never default, they stop seeing your effort as sacrifice and start seeing it as free credit. Mom would say things like, "Don't keep score, Ione, sisters share, families share," but sharing became one-directional. I shared my cash, my patience, my time, my silence. Sabine shared her chaos, and every time I covered for her, paying off a bounced check, slipping her gas money, buying her dinner when she had already spent her wages at a bar, it only deepened the ledger that no one else acknowledged. I can still remember the first $20 bill that vanished from my nightstand. I thought I had miscounted. The second time, I convinced myself I had spent it and forgotten. By the third, I knew. And yet, when I confronted Sabine, she laughed with that tilt of her head that made our parents melt. "Relax, Ione, I just borrowed it. You're so uptight." She'd slip me back a crumpled 5 weeks later, a fraction of what she'd taken, and call it even. Even, that word haunted me. To her, even was an excuse, not a balance. To Mom, fairness was pettiness. Money comes and goes. Don't hold it over her head. To Dad, Sabine's laughter carried more weight than my spreadsheets or savings account. And so the cycle hardened. Sabine spent freely, excused quickly, adored always. I worked silently, saved carefully, and remained overlooked. I told myself it didn't matter, that my worth was in being dependable. At the port, reliability was survival. Containers didn't move on charm, they moved on patience, precision, discipline. I let myself believe the same rules applied at home. If I kept things stable, if I managed the money, if I tightened every loose screw, maybe I could control the chaos. But control isn't love, and sacrifice isn't recognition. Years blurred into a rhythm. Sabine's shopping bags piling up in corners. My overtime shifts funding the quiet gaps in our household bills. She told stories about nights in Long Beach under neon lights, cocktails and laughter with people who got her. My updates, about clearing customs faster, about setting aside money for a consultancy of my own one day, earned nothing more than polite nods. In those moments, resentment swelled like a tide. I didn't admit it, but a part of me wanted someone to notice. To look past the steady paychecks and the balanced accounts and see the toll it took on me to carry the weight for all of us. But invisibility became my role. And roles are hard to break once a family decides who you are. That's why the credit card theft didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like the inevitable result of years of excused behavior. Sabine didn't just take $20, she cashed in on every unspoken permission. Every blind eye, every shrug from Mom, every laugh from Dad, every silence I swallowed. It was betrayal, yes, but it was also a bill finally coming due. And in that moment, I realized something brutal but liberating. Being the reliable one wasn't a badge of honor. It was a trap, a tax I'd been paying for years. And if I didn't draw the line now, there would be nothing left to save, not money, not trust, not even myself. The unraveling began with a single red screen. Transaction declined. Insufficient funds. I stared at it, blinking, certain I had typed something wrong. Dad's card had always been used sparingly, important purchases only. Never frivolous. But when the second attempt failed, the pit opened in my stomach. I clicked into the account page, expecting maybe a minor error, maybe some overlooked fee. What I found was a tidal wave of betrayal written in bold black font. Airline confirmations to Huntington Beach. A non-refundable hotel deposit with ocean views. Designer boutiques lining Pine Avenue, thousands charged in neat, damning lines. Every item stamped with a date. An hour. The same hours I was clocking in at the port. Scanning containers under floodlights while Sabine was planning a vacation funded by my father's trust. I printed every page. Each sheet slid out of the printer like evidence in a trial I hadn't agreed to but could no longer avoid. I laid them across my desk. Row after row. Timestamp after timestamp. It felt like standing in a courtroom with no jury but the walls around me. And still, the truth screamed from the paper. Sabine hadn't stumbled into a mistake. She had calculated it, lifted the card, read the PIN, and set fire to $20 as if money were endless and consequences optional. When she breezed through the door that night, swinging her glossy shopping bags, her smirk cracked the second she saw my face. Before she could spin her story, Dad's boots pounded down the hallway. He burst into the room, his jaw tight, his face flushed the color of rust, voice shaking the walls. Who stole my $20,000? The house went silent. Sabine froze, her bags slipping from her hands. Tissue paper scattering across the rug like confetti from a party she had thrown at our expense. She tried to hold her composure, chin tilted, but the weight of those printed receipts pressed down harder than any glare. I passed the stack to Dad. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. Every charge matches the hours I was at the port. Airline tickets, hotel reservations, luxury boutiques, they're all in her name. Sabine's defense cracked like cheap glass. You're twisting it. I thought it was Ione's card. She wouldn't care. She's always hoarding money anyway. But the receipts didn't lie. And neither did the timestamps. For the first time, Dad's eyes didn't glaze over at her excuses. He looked at her, then back at me, and something in his face shifted. Years of laughter at her stories. Years of silence at my sacrifices. All collided into that 1 second where paper-proof outweighed charm. Mom came in, towel still in her hands. Confusion clouding her face. She read the receipts line by line, her lips tightening with every number. For once, she didn't rush to soothe. Didn't tell us not to keep score. The excuses that had been her reflex simply evaporated. Silence settled, heavier than shouting, thicker than blame. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The receipts fanned out like a mosaic of betrayal. But instead of despair, a strange clarity settled over me. This wasn't just about $20. It was about years of invisible theft, 20s gone from my wallet. Time siphoned from my life. Respect stripped by a family too eager to protect charm over character. I pulled out a legal pad and began writing, not an angry letter. Not a rant, but a plan. Each line broke the debt into installments. Each number a small measure of accountability. If Sabine wanted to argue charm, I had signatures and dates. If she wanted to dismiss responsibility, I had timestamps and contracts. Because the truth was simple, in America, money talks, but paper binds. The house had been heavy with silence for 2 days. Meals passed without conversation. Footsteps echoed like warnings. And even the television sat dark in the corner. By the third night, Dad called us into the living room. He stood by the mantel, the credit card statement folded in his hands. His face set not with anger anymore but with a kind of iron certainty. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority in his tone was heavier than shouting. "I'm not pressing charges," he began. The words clipped. "Final. But this doesn't disappear. $20,000 doesn't vanish into handbags and vacations without consequence. You're going to pay it back." Sabine's arms snapped across her chest. Her chin lifted in defiance. "How? You think I've got that kind of money just lying around?" Her laugh was short, brittle, the sound of someone still trying to lean on old weapons. Dad didn't flinch. "You're going to work. Every paycheck, every tip, every bonus, it all goes toward this debt until it's gone." Then his eyes cut to me. "And it's going to be written down. Witnessed. Clear. No more excuses." All eyes landed on me. The invisible backbone now pulled into the role of scribe and witness. My hands shook as I pulled a legal pad from the drawer. The kind with blue lines and a stiff cardboard backing. The same one I used at the port for shipment notes. But this wasn't about freight or customs codes. This was governance inside our own house. I wrote slowly, my pen scratching each word into permanence. The total sum. The monthly installments. The expectation that every cent would be repaid. No vague promises. No, "I'll figure it out." Just math on paper, binding. Undeniable. I included a clause about missed payments. About what would happen if she tried to slip out of responsibility. When I slid the pages across the table, the silence was louder than any argument. Sabine skimmed the lines, her jaw tightening. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, eyes darting toward Dad, searching for the softness that had always been her shield. But Dad didn't blink. His hands stayed folded, steady, like a judge waiting for a verdict. For a moment, I thought she'd walk away. Then, with a sharp breath, she snatched the pen off the counter. Her signature bled across the bottom line, uneven. Rushed. But there, she shoved the pen back, muttering under her breath as though the ink itself burned her. Dad picked up the papers, folded them carefully, and slid them into an envelope. With deliberate precision, he sealed it shut, the sound of glue catching like the clang of a vault door. It wasn't just a contract, it was a lock. A barrier against chaos. A statement that the days of unchecked charm and endless excuses were over. Mom stood nearby, towel still in her hands. Her face pale but resolute. For years, she had softened every conflict, translating Sabine's selfishness into youthful mistakes. But that night she didn't step in. When Sabine opened her mouth to protest again, Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. And she gave the smallest of nods toward Dad. It was the first time she had stopped shielding her. The weight shifted in the room. Judgment had been passed. Not in a courthouse with gavels and robes. But right there in our own living room. Under the watchful tick of the family clock. And yet it felt no less official. The envelope on the mantel might as well have been stamped by a clerk at the Registry of Deeds. Later, when I was alone, I realized this wasn't revenge. It wasn't about punishing my sister or finally seeing her squirm. It was governance, the kind of boundary every household needs when trust is broken. In America, contracts aren't just for businesses or boardrooms. Sometimes they're the only way to keep family from collapsing under the weight of betrayal. As I slid the envelope into a drawer that night, I knew something fundamental had changed. The golden child had signed away her invincibility, and the invisible sibling had become the keeper of proof. And in that quiet moment, beneath the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the old floorboards, I understood. Accountability had finally come home. The contract sat sealed in the drawer, but its presence reshaped the air in our house. It was no longer about anger or shouting. It was about structure, about proving that when boundaries are written in ink, they hold. Sabine had signed her name, and the ink had turned the tides. Her decline started quickly. Dad drove her to the warehouse in Commerce on her first day. A concrete maze where 12-hour shifts left the air thick with oil and dust. He stood by the car until she disappeared through the metal doors. His posture rigid, no indulgent indulgent. When she came home that night, her hands were blistered, her eyes rimmed red. She kicked off her boots against the wall and muttered about supervisors who barked like drill sergeants. About coworkers who treated her like she was nobody. By the second week, The excuses began: traffic delays, bus schedules, sudden headaches. But the paychecks still came. And every dollar marched straight into Dad's repayment envelope. Her glossy wardrobe, once paraded through our halls, began disappearing piece by piece. A silk blouse turned up in a second-hand shop window on Anaheim Street, price tag dangling like a ghost of its former glory. She was pawning her trophies just to keep gas in her car and groceries in her room. Her friends noticed the shift too. The phone calls dwindled, the texts slowed, the social feeds dried up. The neon nights and champagne smiles vanished, replaced by quiet evenings alone in her room. When I passed her doorway, I sometimes caught her scrolling through old photos, her face washed in the glow of a past that had slipped through her fingers. Mom, once her fiercest defender, no longer rushed in with excuses. When Sabine grumbled about unfairness, Mom only pressed her lips together and kept cooking. The reservoir of justifications had run dry. For the first time, my sister stood alone in the storm of her own making. Watching her shrink under the weight of her choices, I felt a complicated mix of relief and pity. The golden child's shine had finally worn off, leaving behind only the raw truth. The breaking point came with a folded letter: termination, repeated lateness, failure to follow instructions, lack of performance. Dad read it silently, his jaw tight, then said flatly, "You're out of chances. Find new work immediately, or you leave this house." There was no roar, no theatrics, just certainty. Sabine looked to Mom, desperate for a shield that no longer existed. Mom's voice trembled, but her words cut clean. "Your father's right. We can't pretend anymore." For the first time, Sabine had no ally. The ground beneath her finally gave way. The night before she left, she packed quietly. No dramatic speeches, no pleas. Just the soft thud of drawers closing and the rasp of a zipper pulled too far. By dawn, Dad drove us all to the Greyhound station. The smell of exhaust and stale coffee filled the air as the bus idled with its doors open. Sabine stood by the platform, clutching her bag, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. She looked small, almost childlike, stripped of the gloss she had once weaponized. No one spoke. Relief and sorrow twined together in the silence. When the doors hissed shut and the bus pulled away, we stood watching until it blurred into the gray of traffic. In that moment, it felt like a cycle had ended, not with shouting, but with quiet inevitability. Life inside our house shifted. Meals grew steadier, conversations simpler. One night, after I shared a win from the port, a shipment I had cleared ahead of schedule, Dad set down his fork and said words I had waited a lifetime to hear. "You've never failed me, Ione." I should have said that sooner. Mom, too, changed. She started volunteering at a financial literacy clinic near Signal Hill, teaching families how to protect themselves from debt and fraud. She told me, almost to herself, "I thought loving Sabine meant shielding her. Now I see love sometimes means letting someone face the cost." As for me, I finally launched my own consultancy. It wasn't flashy, just a mid-size shipping firm tired of customs delays, but it was mine. I rented a corner office with windows overlooking the cranes, the hum of the port in the distance. And for the first time, I felt ownership of more than survival. The repayment contract still sits in my drawer. I don't keep it as a weapon, or as proof of her failure. I keep it as a reminder that boundaries are not punishments, they are anchors. Anchors that keep you steady when storms try to pull you under. And with that anchor in place, I finally felt free to steer my life toward a different kind of harbor. When I think back on that night, I realize the real turning point wasn't just Sabine signing her name on a repayment plan. It was all of us finally agreeing that trust without accountability will always collapse. Boundaries aren't revenge. They're the anchors that keep you steady when storms hit. The lines that separate love from exploitation. Watching my parents hold her to consequences, and feeling my own work finally recognized, showed me that justice doesn't always happen in a courtroom. Sometimes, it happens right at your own kitchen table, with paper, ink, and the courage to say, enough. If you've ever had to put your foot down with family, or even write out an agreement just to protect yourself, you know how heavy, but freeing, that moment can be. Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true Hard-won victories about betrayal, boundaries, and rebuilding.